With the launch of Murders at Karlov Manor, a mechanic that first came out in 2006 in Time Spiral has just received a functional update which has given it a pretty relevant buff. Let's check out the rules update to Suspend. Suspend is a mechanic that lets you pay a discounted cost for a card, which then puts the card in exile with a number of time counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may remove a single time counter from any number of cards you own in exile with a time counter on it, and when the last time counter is removed, you get to cast the spell for free. Any creatures cast this way would gain haste. The functional update is really quite simple. Just 2 words are being added to the rules text, but this change buffs a number of decks, especially in the modern format. Those 2 words are, "You may." The final section of Suspend now says this: when the last time counter is removed, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. Now, while this change is incredibly small, it impacts 2 of the strongest decks in Modern, Mono Red Burn and 4-color Rhinos. Both of these decks use powerful Suspend cards, so let's go over how they're impacted. For 4-color Rhinos, the usual game plan is to simply cascade into the namesake card, Crashing Footfalls, and get some Rhinos onto the battlefield on turn 3. But sometimes you just happen to have a copy of the card in your opening hand and simply suspend it on turn 1. Because Rhinos is such a prominent deck, one of the key sideboard cards to use against this deck is Roiling Vortex, a 2-mana red enchantment that has the relevant ability: whenever a player casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast that spell, Roiling Vortex deals 5 damage to that player. Roiling Vortex is great against Invoked, Incarnations, and the free spell you get from a Cascade trigger. But of course, with both of these instances, you could choose simply not to cast them to avoid taking 5 damage. However, with Suspend cards, you never had that choice. Suspend said, when the last time counter is removed, cast it without paying its mana cost. You had to cast the spell, whether it was going to be a good or a bad outcome for you. So if you were on 5 life and there was a Roiling Vortex in play, unfortunately, it was bad news bears for you. A similar situation arose with Mono Red players too. During the mid stage of a game, if the Mono Red player suspended a Rift Bolt and their opponent proceeded to play Leyline of Sanctity with no creatures in play on their turn, when it came back to the Mono Red player, they would have no choice but to cast Rift Bolt either on themselves or one of their creatures. Again, it was not a fun time. So while it's great that players now have a choice whether or not to cast Suspend cards, it's also really important to keep this in mind. Once that last time counter is removed and you choose not to cast the spell, it will perpetually remain in exile. You do not get another chance to cast the card, and there is currently no way to put another time counter on the card to get the trigger again. So, what do we think of this rules change? Be sure to leave a like if you learned something, and subscribe if you like Suspend cards. I'll see you in the next one.